Chapter 1. Everything she owned fit in a garbage bag. The rain didn't care that I had nowhere to go. It fell in sheets across the Montclair district, turning the gutters into rivers, hammering the awnings of closed boutiques and dark restaurants until the whole city sounded like it was being punished for something. I pressed my back against the brick wall beneath the narrow overhang of an Italian delicatessen that had been shuttered since Tuesday, pulled my knees to my chest, and tried to decide if the cold was worse than the humiliation. It wasn't close. The humiliation won. I was 26 years old with a garbage bag full of clothes, $43 in my coat pocket, and absolutely nowhere to sleep on a Wednesday night in October. My name is Sarah Voss, and until 9 hours ago I had a job, a room above the laundry house on Croft Street, and the fragile illusion that I was building something. Slowly, quietly, brick by brick. Then the building burned, not metaphorically, literally. An electrical fire ripped through the laundry house at noon, and by the time the fire department finished, I had nothing left but what I'd grabbed on my way out. The bag, the coat, my phone with a cracked screen and 11% battery. The job went with the building. Mrs. Harlan, who ran the laundry and paid me to manage her books and clean the upstairs floors, was already on the phone with her insurance company. She'd looked at me with something almost like guilt before getting in her brother's car and driving away without another word. I didn't blame her. She had her own disaster to survive. Mine had no one to call. I'd spent the afternoon trying. The city shelter on Aldgate was full. The one on Penn was closed for renovation. My only friend in the city, Danny, had moved back to her parents' house in Connecticut 6 weeks ago. And when I called, she answered on the first ring and then couldn't stop apologizing because her mother was already furious about her being home and there was no room, and I told her it was fine. I hung up before she heard my voice break. So there I was. 11:30 at night, the rain accelerating. My back against brick, my garbage bag pulled under the overhang, my chin resting on my knees, doing the math on whether I could make $43 stretch into something that resembled a plan. I must have fallen asleep without deciding to. I don't remember closing my eyes. I remember the sound of the rain changing, deepening, and the cold settling into my bones, the way it does when your body just gives up arguing with the weather. I remember thinking, just a minute, just rest your eyes for 1 minute, and then nothing. The first thing I registered when consciousness crept back was warmth. Warmth, which made no sense. Warmth does not belong on wet sidewalks at midnight in October. I felt it against my left side first. Heat radiating from something close, something large. And then I smelled it. Sandalwood. Cedar. Something darker underneath, like smoke and iron and expensive things I'd never been close enough to name. I opened my eyes. The rain was still falling, but it was falling past me now, beyond the perimeter of something. A coat, I realized. Someone was holding an umbrella over me. No, not an umbrella. They were crouching beside me, their body half blocking the wind, their coat across my shoulders. I looked up. The man looking back at me was not the kind of man who crouches on wet sidewalks. Everything about him said that. The cut of his dark suit, still immaculate despite the rain. The watch on his wrist, which I didn't need to know anything about watches to understand, was obscenely expensive. The line of his jaw, clean and sharp, the kind of bone structure that makes you angry at yourself for noticing it. Dark hair, slightly damp at the temples, eyes the color of stormwater. Gray-green, unreadable, locked on my face with an intensity that made the back of my throat tighten. He wasn't touching me, he was just there, occupying all the available air. "You're shaking," he said. His voice was low, quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't need volume because it has never needed to raise itself to be heard. "I'm fine," I said, which was objectively absurd. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite amusement. Not quite anything I could name. "You're sleeping in front of my building," he said. I looked up, really looked at the brass numbers above the delicatessen's locked door. 14 Rue Montclair. And then at the building beside it, 5 stories of dark stone and iron balconies and windows that glowed amber from within, the kind of building that doesn't have a sign because it doesn't need one. Private. Fortified, I realized now. The kind of fortified that looks like architecture if you're not paying attention. I didn't know, I started. Get up, he said. Not cruelly, not kindly, simply. An instruction delivered the way gravity delivers things. As fact. You'll be dead by morning out here. I should have said no. I should have gathered my garbage bag and my $43 and my dignity and walked into the rain. Every rational instinct I had said, this is a stranger, this is a dark building, this is the kind of story that ends badly. Instead, I watched his hand extend toward me, palm up, steady, waiting, and felt something in my chest make a decision my brain hadn't finished making yet. I took his hand. He pulled me to my feet in one smooth motion, and the warmth of his palm shot straight up my arm like current. He looked at my garbage bag. Then at me. Then away. Come, he said, and I followed him inside. Chapter 2. What his name does to a room. The lobby was marble. Of course it was marble. Cold white stone veined with gray, lit by a single chandelier that cast everything in amber the color of aged cognac. My sneakers were soaked through and they squeaked on the floor with every step, the most embarrassing sound I had ever made in my life. I watched the wet footprints I left behind me and felt the particular shame of being visibly out of place. He didn't look back. He walked like a man who never questions whether the room will accommodate him, because it always does. Long strides, unhurried, his wet coat still somehow appearing pressed. I followed at a half-step behind, clutching my garbage bag against my chest, telling myself this was temporary, this was survival, this was just one night. One night. Then you figure it out. The elevator was brushed steel and mirror. I caught my reflection in it and winced, hair plastered to my face, mascara I'd put on yesterday morning, tracked down my cheeks, the garbage bag enormous and black in my arms. I looked like a before photo for something. He looked like a magazine cover. He didn't look at the mirror. He looked at nothing, which I was beginning to understand was a deliberate choice, not vacancy, but containment. He held himself like a man accustomed to surveillance, to being watched, to having every muscle calculated. "What's your name?" I asked, because the silence was unbearable. He turned his head, just slightly, just enough. "Dorian Voss," he said, and then, because the universe apparently enjoys cruelty, "Yours?" I stared at him. "Sarah," I said. Sarah Voss. The same surname. I watched him process it. A fractional pause, something shifting behind his eyes, and then the elevator opened, and he stepped out. And whatever he'd been about to say evaporated. I followed him into a hallway of dark wood paneling and Persian runners, the kind of hallway that muffles sound the way velvet does. And I understood that we shared a last name the way strangers share a city. Coincidence. Nothing more. Voss is not an uncommon name, except that it felt like something. I didn't know what yet. He opened a door at the end of the hall. A room. A real room, not a closet, not a corner. A bedroom with a window overlooking the wet street below. A duvet. The color of storm clouds, a lamp already glowing on the nightstand as if someone had anticipated arrival. "You can sleep here," he said. "The bathroom is through that door. There are towels." I stood in the doorway. "Why?" I asked. He turned to face me fully for the first time since the lobby, and I made myself hold his gaze. Stormwater eyes. Close up, I could see fine lines at the corners and something underneath the control. Exhaustion, maybe. Or grief. Or both, which tend to look the same. "You were sleeping on my sidewalk," he said. "Now you're sleeping in my building." That's not an answer. A pause. Something that might have been the beginning of respect, or just assessment. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He left, closed the door behind him. I stood in the middle of the room with my garbage bag and my wet shoes and my hammering pulse, and tried to decide if I had just made a catastrophic mistake. In the morning, I learned his name the way the city learns it, by reaction. I'd woken to voices below the window. 2 men in dark coats on the sidewalk. The rain stopped now, the street silver gray in early light. One of them said something in Italian. The other one said a name, Voss. And then he said it again, Il Voss. And even through the glass, Even not understanding Italian, I heard what the name did to him, the way he stood differently after he said it. The lowered shoulders, the quick check over both shoulders. I looked it up on my cracked phone, searching with the 11% I'd nursed through the night. Dorian Voss. 42. Shipping magnate, nominally. Heir to the Voss family interests technically. Named in 2 separate federal investigations in the last decade, never charged. Photographed at a charity gala in Monaco, at a summit in Geneva, at a restaurant in Naples that I found 3 separate articles calling a known meeting point for organized crime figures. There were no photos of him crouching on wet sidewalks, holding his coat above sleeping strangers. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone and my new knowledge and felt the situation sharpening around me the way cold does right before it becomes dangerous. That moment of hyperclarity where you understand that you made a choice you can't unmake. He was mafia, or something adjacent to it, or something that didn't have a clean word. And I was in his building, in his room, wearing a borrowed robe I'd found on the back of the bathroom door, and my garbage bag was sitting in the corner like a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't meant to write. A knock at the door. "There's breakfast," said a woman's voice, not his. I opened the door to a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and an expression that communicated clearly that she had seen many strange things in this building, and I was not the strangest. She was holding a tray. Scrambled eggs, toast, black coffee, a small glass of orange juice. "Mr. Voss has a position," she said, "if you want it." I blinked. A position? He needs someone to manage the household books? She looked at my garbage bag with one brief, surgical glance. "He says you know numbers." He didn't know anything about me, except he'd seen the notebook. I hadn't thought about that, but I'd had it in my coat pocket, the small ledger I carried everywhere, habit from years of managing Mrs. Harlan's accounts. It must have fallen out in the lobby. He must have seen it. $43. No room. Nowhere to go. "Yes," I said. "I know numbers." The woman nodded as if I'd confirmed something. "Good," she said. "You start tomorrow." Chapter 3. The man behind the locked door. His study existed on the 4th floor. Behind a door I was specifically told not to knock on between the hours of 7 and midnight. The woman with iron gray hair was named Heloise, and she delivered instructions the way she delivered breakfast trays, efficiently, without warmth, with the expectation of comprehension on the first pass. I was to manage household accounts, groceries, staff wages, maintenance invoices, supplier contracts. I had access to 3 filing cabinets in the 2nd floor office. I had access to the kitchen, the laundry, the garden, terrace. I did not have access to the 4th floor or the basement or any room with a keypad instead of a standard lock. "And Mr. Voss?" I asked. Heloise looked at me the way people look at questions that are both obvious and slightly inappropriate. "When he needs you, he'll find you," she said. I spent my first full day learning the shape of the house. Its rhythms, its sounds, its particular silences. The building was always occupied but rarely loud. Men came and went through the front entrance, never staying long, always speaking in lowered voices. The phones rang and were answered in rooms I couldn't see. Twice I heard what I thought was someone arguing in Italian, and twice the sound stopped so abruptly it left the air feeling rearranged. The household accounts were a mess. Not the catastrophic kind. Someone had been maintaining them, but carelessly, the way you maintain something when your attention is elsewhere and you're relying on the previous person to have been thorough. There were gaps in the supplier records. There were 3 vendors whose invoices didn't match the delivery logs. Small things. The kind of small things that add up to a significant number if you let them run long enough. I flagged them in a clean column, wrote a summary, left it on the desk. At 11 that night, when I was in the kitchen making tea because I couldn't sleep, he appeared in the doorway. He'd taken off the jacket. Dark shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked less armored, not less dangerous. Something in him was always dangerous the way certain animals are dangerous whether they're moving or still. But the jacket had been structure, formality, distance. Without it, I could see the breadth of his shoulders, the deliberate economy of how he moved, the way he stopped in the doorway like a man who always pauses before entering any room he hasn't already calculated. He was holding my summary. "The Castelli vendor," he said. billing for premium grade on standard supplies. Across 18 months, the difference adds up to $47,000, he said. I blinked. I didn't finish the calculation yet. I did. He looked at the page, then at me. How long did it take you to find it? A few hours. Something changed in his expression. Barely. A slight release around the eyes, a fractional softening of the line of his mouth. Sit down, he said. It wasn't aggressive. It was just how he talked. Like every sentence was a decision he'd already made. I sat at the kitchen table. He sat across from me, and the silence between us was the specific kind that has texture, not uncomfortable, not comfortable, just present. He set the summary down between us and looked at it. You're good at finding what doesn't fit, he said. I'm good at patterns. Most people don't see them. Most people aren't looking. He looked up. Those gray-green eyes, direct and measuring. I made myself hold his gaze, which cost me something. Not because he was threatening, exactly, but because there was something in being seen by him that felt like standing too close to a heat source, warming and warning at the same time. He reached into his shirt pocket and set something on the table between us. A watch, simple, stainless steel, the crystal cracked across the face, not the expensive one he wore. This one was older, worn. The kind of thing kept for reasons that aren't about function. My father gave this to me, he said, the day he told me I would inherit his business. He said business the way people say words they've chosen very carefully. I was 19. I thought it was a promotion. I looked at the watch, then at him. It wasn't. It was a sentence. Something moved through his face. Not vulnerability exactly. More like the shadow vulnerability leaves when it passes. He put that watch in my hand and I became someone else. Someone who doesn't have the option of sleeping on sidewalks. The sentence hung there. You think sleeping on sidewalks is an option? I asked. I think freedom is, he said, in its own way. I didn't know what to say to that. I looked at the cracked crystal, the worn band, the frozen hands. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He picked up the watch, put it back in his pocket. Because you found $47,000 in an afternoon, he said, and you didn't take any of it. He stood, straightened his sleeves. Good night, Sir Voss, he said. He left, and I sat in the kitchen with the ghost of his voice, the faint remainder of sandalwood in the air, and the distinct, deeply inconvenient sense that something had just begun that I wasn't ready for. The watch, the cracked face, the frozen hands. That became the thing I came back to when I thought about him, which I found myself doing more than was advisable, not the jaw, or the eyes, or the money, or the danger. The watch. The way he'd said sentence. The 19-year-old boy who thought inheritance was a promotion. I understood that kind of trap, the ones you walk into before you know they have walls. Chapter 4. 3 names, 2 threats, 1 unmarked car. The unmarked car appeared on Thursday. Dark blue sedan parked across from the building's main entrance, present when I left for my morning walk at 7 and still there, or returned to the same position. When I came back at 8:30, I noticed it the way I notice things that don't quite belong to their surroundings. Too still. Tinted windows. Engine running, just slightly, a barely there plume from the exhaust that said someone was sitting inside, waiting. I mentioned it to Heloise, who said nothing, which I was beginning to understand was itself a kind of answer. By Friday, there were 2 cars. The house changed around them. Not obviously. No one said anything. No alarm sounded. Nothing dramatic occurred. But the staff moved differently. Doors that had been left ajar were closed. The men who came and went through the front entrance now came through the courtyard at the back. Heloise began locking the kitchen exterior door after 8 in the morning, and Dorian Voss stopped leaving the building. I knew his rhythms by then. 2 weeks in, I'd cataloged them the way I cataloged everything, without deciding to. He left at 9, returned by 11, left again at 3. Sometimes he didn't come back until after midnight, and I'd hear the front door and the elevator at 1 or 2 in the morning, and feel something in my chest release that I hadn't known was held. I wasn't sure what to do with that information about myself, so I filed it under irrelevant and kept working. When he stopped leaving, the house got quieter in a way that was not peaceful. On Saturday, someone knocked on my office door. Not Heloise. A man I'd seen twice in the corridors, mid-40s, compact haircut, military short, the kind of eyes that track doorways first and people second. He introduced himself as Galt. Just Galt. "Mr. Voss would like to see you," he said. "Fourth floor." The door I wasn't supposed to knock on, it was already open. The study was large and low-lit, a wall of windows looking out over the rain-gray city. Books, real ones, read ones, with broken spines and pages marked with slips of paper. A desk that held a laptop, a phone, and 3 neat stacks of documents. A chess set on a side table, game mid-play, which meant either he played against himself or there was someone I hadn't seen. Dorian was standing at the window, hands in his pockets, watching the street. "Close the door," he said. I did. I heard Galt's footsteps withdraw. "The cars?" I said, because I'd rather address the thing than circle it. He turned. He looked tired. Not the body tired of missed sleep, but the specific fatigue of sustained vigilance, the kind that takes up residence in the eyes. "You noticed." "On Thursday. Both of them." Something sharpened in his expression. "How?" he asked. "They're too still. Parked cars don't sit like that unless someone inside is trying not to move." He studied me for a moment. Then he moved to the desk, picked up a folder, and held it out to me. I didn't take it immediately. "What's in it?" I asked. 3 names, he said. A man named Ferenczi. A man named Toulon. A man named Benedict Sar. He set the folder down on the edge of the desk when I didn't reach for it. Ferenczi controls the western ports. Toll runs enforcement for a competing family. Sar is federal, or was, until he started supplementing his income. And they're all interested in what I know, he said. And how much of it you might have access to. The air went very still. "Me," I said. "You work in my building. You have access to my accounts." His voice was entirely flat, entirely controlled. "In certain circles, that makes you a liability." "I've seen grocery invoices," I said, "and a fraudulent vendor. They don't know what you've seen. So explain to them, Sarah." His voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. It simply stopped me. "These aren't people you explain things to." I looked at the folder on the desk. 3 names, a thin cardboard sleeve with the weight of an entirely different life inside it. "You're telling me I'm in danger," I said. "I'm telling you I'm managing it. Those aren't the same thing." A pause. The briefest acknowledgement that I was correct. "No," he said, "they aren't." I moved to the window then, standing a few feet from where he'd been standing, looking down at the street. The blue sedan was there. The second car was around the corner. I knew its position by now. "Why tell me at all?" I asked the glass. I heard him move. He came to stand beside me, not close, not touching, but I was aware of him in the specific way you're aware of things that radiate heat. Sandalwood and cedar and something underneath that I'd stopped trying to name. "Because you deserve to choose," he said quietly. "I can arrange you somewhere else, safe, removed from all of this." He paused. "Or you stay." I turned to look at him. His profile against the gray window light, the line of his jaw, the exhausted, careful set of his eyes. "If I stay," I said, "then I protect you." He said it simply, the same way he said everything, as established fact. "And you continue your work." I thought about $43. I thought about the burned laundry house. I thought about Danny apologizing on the phone, about the shelter that was full, about the wet sidewalk and the cold and the garbage bag. I thought about the watch with the cracked face. "I stay," I said. He didn't smile. He didn't exhale with relief or reach for my hand or do anything that the situation might have cinematically suggested. He just looked at me, that direct, measuring look, and nodded. "Then don't go near the windows on the second floor after dark," he said. And I understood that we had just made an agreement whose full terms I didn't yet know. Chapter 5. The space between his shoulder and the wall. We got the news about Tull on a Tuesday. He'd moved his operation 3 blocks closer. The Eastern Loading Yard, a facility Dorian's people used for legitimate shipping, was now being surveilled from a building Tull had rented under a company name that resolved to a shell that resolved to nothing. Gout delivered the information over breakfast, and Dorian received it without expression, asked 2 questions in Italian, and dismissed everyone except me, apparently because I was standing in the doorway of the kitchen holding a folder of utility invoices, and had nowhere obvious to go. "Sit," he said. I sat. He stood at the counter drinking coffee, looking at nothing. The tension in his shoulders was visible even from across the room. Not fear, I realized. He wasn't afraid. He was doing something more exhausting than fear. He was calculating. "The accounts," he said, after a moment. "The Castelli corrections. Have they been finalized?" "Sent to the vendor on Friday. I have the acknowledgement." "Good." He set down his mug. "Galt is going to need a clean record of all supplier access to the loading yard. Every invoice, every delivery window 6 months back. I can have it by tonight." He looked at me then, the way he looked when I surprised him, which wasn't often, but was something I'd started recognizing. A slight widening behind the eyes, brief and quickly contained. "4 hours," he said. "3," I said. "If you have someone unlock the filing cabinet in the storage room." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. "Gout," he said without raising his voice. Galt materialized from the hallway, as if conjured. 4 hours later, I delivered a 16-page document that cross-referenced every third-party access event against delivery timestamps, flagged 3 anomalies, and noted which anomaly had occurred within 48 hours of an invoice from a company called Breyerfeld Partners that appeared once in the records and never again. Dorian read it in silence at the kitchen table. I watched him read, which I knew was strange and couldn't stop doing. There was something in watching him think. The stillness of it, the focused quiet, that I found unreasonably compelling. "Breyerfeld," he said. "I can't find a business registration. The invoice address resolves to a parking structure." He turned a page. "Read another minute." "You should have been an investigator," he said. "I'm just good with numbers." "You're good with gaps," he said. He looked up. "Numbers anyone can manage. Gaps require intuition." Something warmed in my chest, which I promptly ignored. That night, the building's generator failed for 45 minutes. It happened at 10:15. The lights going out in a clean sweep. The hum of the HVAC dying, the whole building suddenly breathing differently in the dark. The emergency lighting came on, thin and amber, casting everything in half-shadow. I was in the second-floor office when it happened, and I immediately stepped back from the window, remembering his instruction, and stood against the interior wall. The door opened 2 minutes later. Dorian, with a flashlight, moving quietly and quickly the way he moved everything, already having made the decision before he arrived. "You're all right," he said. It wasn't entirely a question. Yes, I remembered about the windows. He looked at me at where I was standing against the wall away from the glass. He didn't say anything, but something in his face shifted. He moved to check the window himself, scanning the street. His body angled so I was behind him, and that was when it happened. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to. He shifted, and the angle changed, and I was standing in the space between his shoulder and the wall, and the darkness closed around us, and I could feel the warmth of him without being close enough to touch, and I was aware of every breath in a way that made breathing suddenly complicated. He was still looking at the window. "Is it deliberate?" I asked, very quietly. Yes. He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. Someone cut the external line. Tull? Or a message from one of the others. What does it mean? He turned then. We were closer than we'd been, the darkness condensing space. I could see the planes of his face in the amber emergency light, the fine exhaustion around his eyes, the careful set of his jaw. It means they want me distracted, he said, worried, making mistakes. Are they succeeding? A pause. They're trying, he said. His hand came up slow, deliberate, and touched the wall beside my head. Not caging, not possessive. just steadying himself or occupying a gesture that didn't have a safer shape. I felt it in my spine, that hand against the wall 12 inches from my ear. "Sira," he said. My name in his mouth always sounded like a decision. "What?" He looked at me for a long moment. In the amber light, with the building held and breathless quiet around us, I watched something move through his face. Not calculation for once. Something more human. Something that cost him to show. "Don't be alone on this floor after dark," he said finally. And I understood that wasn't what he'd meant to say. He lowered his hand. Stepped back. The space between us reopened like pressure releasing. "The generator will be restored in the hour," he said. "Stay in the kitchen until it is." He left. I stood against the wall in the amber dark and felt my heartbeat in places that had nothing to do with fear, and told myself, firmly and repeatedly, that this was a complicated situation, and he was a dangerous man, and I was an employee in a house that was being watched by people whose names I now knew. It didn't help as much as I needed it to. Chapter 6. What he said at 2 a.m. I found him on the rooftop on a Friday night in early November. I hadn't been looking for him. I'd gone up because I couldn't sleep, because the study ceiling was doing that thing where it becomes a surface for projecting anxieties, and because I'd discovered 2 weeks earlier that the rooftop door wasn't locked, and the view of the city from up there was the most honest thing about the building. No fortification, no marble, just wind and dark sky and the city laid out below in lights, indifferent and glittering. He was sitting on the low concrete ledge, his back to the door, looking west. He'd heard me come up, of course he had, but he didn't turn around. I almost went back inside. Instead, I walked to the ledge and sat down 6 feet from him, and we were quiet together in the way that had become its own language between us over the past weeks. Not comfortable silence. Charged silence. The kind where you're aware of the charge and choosing not to mention it. The city hummed below. Someone somewhere was playing music, faint and gone before I could identify it. "You don't sleep?" I said. "Neither do you." "I have reasons. So do I." I looked at his profile. The wind was moving his hair slightly, and he looked different, up here, less contained. Like the removal of walls and ceilings did something to his architecture. "Is it always like this?" I asked. He turned his head. "Like what?" "Like," I gestured. "The cars, the names, the waiting." He turned back to the city. "It was worse," he said. "After my father died, there was a period of about 8 months where I wasn't sure I'd survive the transition. Every family in the network was testing the edges." He paused. "I did things in those 8 months I don't talk about. You don't have to." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm choosing to." A breath. "There was a man named Vesper. He'd worked for my father for 20 years. I trusted him." Another pause. Longer. "He sold our route maps to Firenze for 300,000. 3 of my people died." The wind moved between us. "I'm sorry," I said, because it was true, and because sometimes true things are the only things available. "I dealt with Vesper," he said, in the particular flat tone that meant he would not be elaborating, "and then I stopped trusting people." He looked at me. "Until, apparently," he said, "very recently." I felt it hit. That sentence, the quiet weight of it, the implication held carefully in the word apparently. "Dorian," I said. He made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite anything. He reached into his pocket and put the cracked watch on the concrete ledge between us. In the ambient city light, the frozen hands were visible. "My father told me love was a luxury," he said. "That men in our position couldn't afford it, that it was a weapon other people would use." He looked at the watch. "I believed him for 20 years. And now?" Silence. The city below glittering, not caring. "Now I have a woman sleeping in my building who finds $47,000 discrepancies in 3 hours and argues with me in complete sentences." He looked up, and I don't know what to do with that. It was the most unguarded thing he'd ever said to me. I reached out, very slowly, and picked up the watch. Held it in my palm. The metal was warm from his pocket. I looked at the frozen hands. "You could wind it," I said. He looked at the watch in my hand. "The mechanism is broken," he said. "Then you could get it fixed." A long pause. "Some things can't be fixed," he said. "They can only be carried." I set the watch down between us again. Our hands were 3 inches apart on the concrete ledge. I was acutely aware of those 3 inches. "My father left when I was 12, I said, not entirely sure why. Except that it felt like reciprocity, like the only thing I had to offer that was worth the same weight. "He didn't die. He just stopped coming home. One day, I realized it had been 4 months and he wasn't coming back. And my mother was pretending she hadn't noticed, and I stopped. Started again. I became very good at managing things, at finding the gaps, at making numbers balance." "Because he didn't," he said. I nodded. "Because no one was," I said. "So I learned to." His hand moved. Just slightly. The side of his fingers brushed the side of mine on the concrete. Barely contact, barely intentional, but deliberate, impossible to mistake for accident. Neither of us moved. "Sierra," he said, very quietly. "Don't," I said. "Don't say something you've decided. Not right now." A pause. "What would you prefer?" he asked. "Just." I looked at the city. "Just sit here for a minute." He was quiet. The wind came over the rooftop edge, carrying rain and cold and the distant sounds of a city continuing without us. His finger was still touching mine on the concrete, the lightest point of contact, barely anything. Everything. "All right," he said, and we sat there in the dark, not moving, not speaking, our hands barely touching on the ledge of a building full of locked rooms and dangerous names and all the things we hadn't said. It was the most intimate moment of my life. Chapter 7. What she found in the cabinet. I found the file on a Monday, 3 weeks after the rooftop. It shouldn't have been in the third cabinet. The third cabinet was suppliers, contracts, maintenance, the mundane architecture of a household that needed to appear ordinary. I'd been through every folder in it twice, but on this Monday, I was looking for a specific delivery contract from 18 months back, the kind of thing that requires going all the way to the back of the bottom drawer. And when I pulled the divider forward, there was a folder that had been pressed flat against the back panel, spine out, as if pushed there deliberately. No label. I should have left it. I took it to the desk and opened it. The first page was a photograph. A woman. Dark-haired, late 30s. Taken from distance. The kind of photograph you take when you don't want the subject to know. She was on a street somewhere warm, lighter than the city, standing at a cafe table. She was holding a child's hand. A small girl, maybe 4 years old. The second page was a name. Renata Moore, an address in Lisbon, a phone number. The third page was a transaction record, a single line with a date from 14 months ago. The amount, $200,000, transferred from an account I recognized as one of the shell companies in the supplier network. Destination. A private account I'd never seen. There were no other pages. I sat for a long time, looking at those 3 pages. And the thing that settled into me wasn't jealousy? Not exactly. But something colder and more complicated. I was good at patterns. I was good at gaps. And what I was looking at was either a woman he was protecting, a woman he was paying, or a woman he was hiding. And the child. The child. I put the folder back, pressed it against the back panel, closed the drawer. At dinner that evening, I watched him from across the kitchen table while he reviewed documents and ate without looking at his food. And I thought, I know how to hold this. I thought, I'd held things before. I thought, it doesn't mean anything. It could be anything. But that night I couldn't sleep again, and the reasons had changed. He found me in the kitchen at midnight, same as it always went. Something about this building, this hour, this kitchen, which had become a neutral space between us where the rules were different. The Breyerfeld account, he said, sitting down. I have a name. Who? Someone inside the building. He said it carefully. Someone who's been selling access information for the last 7 months. I looked up. Staff? Galt's assistant, A young man named Rhine. He said the name without inflection. He was placed here 6 months before you arrived. We didn't know. How did you... You found the Brierfeld anomaly. I traced the invoice origin. He paused. If you hadn't flagged it, what happens to Rhine? A pause. The specific pause I had learned meant I'm deciding how honest to be. He'll be removed, Dorian said. Removed, I repeated. Removed from the building. He met my eyes. He'll be handed to Galt and dealt with through the appropriate. He stopped. Looked at me. You want to know if I'm going to hurt him? Yes. He's young, Dorian said after a moment. He was likely coerced. We're still establishing the full picture. I breathed. Thank you for telling me, I said. You deserve the truth of what you're inside. The word inside hung there. I thought about Lisbon, the photograph, the little girl's hand. Dorian, I said, who is Renata Moore? The air changed. It was immediate, a visible thing, the way his stillness shifted from the controlled kind to the arrested kind. The difference between a man at rest and a man who has just touched something electric. He looked at me. Where did you hear that name? I held his gaze. The back of the third cabinet, I said. I wasn't looking for it. The silence was very long. She's. He stopped. Reorganized. She's protected. Under my arrangement, she and her daughter. Why? Another long pause. Because her husband worked for my father, he said carefully, and her husband's death was a consequence of things my father set in motion. She was left with nothing. He looked at the table. I have the means to correct that. I sat with it, turned it over. Is she in danger? I asked. She was. Less so now. And the child? Safe. He said it like a commitment, not a fact. I looked at him, this man, this architecture of control and danger and carefully managed distance, and something in me shifted. Not the hot tipping of attraction, which had been building steadily for weeks, but something slower and more destabilizing, the recognition of conscience. That underneath everything, the locked rooms and the dangerous names and the men who appeared from nowhere, there was someone who paid for a dead man's family, because it was the right thing to do, and told nobody. You should tell me these things, I said. I know. He sounded tired. I know that now. He reached across the table, very slowly, and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm, large. The weight of his hand on mine was so careful it was almost reverent. I'm sorry, he said, for what I kept from you. I turned my hand under his and held it back. Don't keep things from me again, I said. I'll try. We both knew what try meant in this house, but I held his hand anyway. Chapter 8, Blood on White Marble. The attack came on a Thursday. Not a knock, not a warning, not the slow creeping surveillance of the blue sedans. It came at 6 p.m. when the city was busy enough to provide cover, and it came through the courtyard. The back entrance that only the trusted used. Galt identified it later as an inside route, Rhyme. Before he was removed, had given someone the access code. I was in the kitchen. I heard the sound first. Not an explosion, nothing dramatic, but the particular crack of a door being forced that is different from any other sound a building makes, and then voices, loud and wrong, and then Heloise's hand on my arm, appearing from nowhere, pulling me back. Kitchen stairs, she said. Now. I went. Behind me I heard, I won't describe all of it, I'll describe only what I saw. I came back down 15 minutes later after the sounds had stopped, when the building was holding a different kind of silence, the aftermath kind, thick and ringing. I came down because I heard Dorian's voice and it was clipped and short, and that was worse to me than the silence. The marble floor of the entrance hall had blood on it. 2 of Galt's men were there, one sitting, one being helped. The other men, the ones who'd come through the courtyard, were gone. Though I understood from context that gone had more than one meaning. And Dorian was standing against the far wall. He was upright. He was controlled. He was holding his left forearm against his ribs, and when he moved, I saw it, a cut across his palm, deep, wrapped in cloth that had already saturated red. He was looking at the damage, doing his calculation, and then he looked up and saw me. Something crossed his face, fast and unguarded, the expression of someone who didn't expect to be seen in this particular moment. It was not the expression of a mafia boss. It was the expression of a man who was very tired and had just been reminded of everything fragile. "You came down," he said. "You were hurt," I said. He looked at his hand. "It's manageable," he said. "Let me see." He didn't move for a moment. Then he crossed the room and held out his hand to me. I unwrapped the cloth. The cut was clean. Something sharp, not a bullet, a blade of some kind. And it was deep, but not catastrophic. My hands were steady. I've always been steadier in practical crisis than in emotional ones. "Hellies," I said, "first aid kit." She was already moving. I cleaned the wound and wrapped it properly, working in silence while Dorian stood with his forearm in my hands and looked at the side of my face with an expression I felt more than saw. When I finished and looked up, he was close. Closer than necessary. And the careful control in his eyes had developed a crack. "You should have stayed upstairs," he said. "You needed someone with working hands. I have people for that. Your people have their own injuries." I tied off the bandage. His hand remained in both of mine. "Dorian, what? What almost happened tonight?" A long pause. "A message," he said. "Ferenczi. This was a demonstration. He wanted me to see he could reach inside." "Can he?" "He just did." His voice was flat but not cold, something underneath it, carefully contained. "The access code was the breach. It won't happen again." I looked at the blood on the marble floor. Someone had already begun cleaning it. Was anyone, two of mine, minor, one of theirs critical? He paused. "They should have sent fewer," said without heat. Just fact. And I understood again, for maybe the 10th time since I'd arrived in this building, what he was. Not a man who played at danger. A man who lived inside it, had always lived inside it, had been handed a life that fit like a sentence. "Dorian," I said, "say what you're going to say." "I'm not leaving," I said. He looked at me. "Sira, I know what tonight was. I know what the cars are. I know there are more people like Ferenczi." I held his gaze. "I'm not leaving. You should. Maybe." I didn't release his hand. "I'm not." Something broke open in his face, quietly, the way things break when they've been under pressure for a very long time. Not collapse. Release. He looked at me with all of it visible. The exhaustion, the vigilance, the 20 years of solitude, the 19-year-old boy and the broken watch. And he didn't hide any of it. "You're the most confounding person," he said quietly, "I have ever encountered in my life." "I'm good at patterns," I said, "and you are not as unpredictable as you think you are." The corner of his mouth moved. "Is that so?" "You're going to try to make me leave," I said. "And then I'm not going to. And then you're going to stop trying." He was quiet for a moment. "Probably," he said. His uninjured hand came up and touched my face, the side of my jaw, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. And it was so careful, so deliberate, so completely different from how he touched anything else in the world, that my breath simply left my body. "I'm going to need to make some calls," he said softly, "and then I'm going to want you to be somewhere I can see you." "All right," I said. He let his hand fall, stepped back, became, again, the controlled and dangerous version, though I could see now that it was a choice he made, not a thing he simply was. "All right," he echoed. Behind us, the marble was clean. Almost. Chapter 9. What surrender actually sounds like. He came to find me at midnight. Not the kitchen this time. I was in the room they'd given me, which felt less like my room every day and more simply like the room I occupied in a house that had slowly become the most real place I'd ever lived. I was sitting in the chair by the window with the lamp on, not reading the book in my lap, watching the rain on the glass and trying to organize the evening into something with clean edges. The knock was quiet. 2 knocks. His. "Come in," I said. He stood in the doorway in a dark shirt and charcoal trousers, his bandaged hand at his side, his face in the low lamplight looking more open than I'd seen it. Or perhaps I'd simply learned to read it better. I spoke with Galt, he said. The house is secured, the access codes are reset. He paused, and something shifted. He wasn't reporting anymore. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm all right. He didn't move from the doorway. Dorian, I said. Come in. He came in. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, facing me. And we were quiet for a moment in a way that felt different from all the other quiet between us. Softer, less guarded. The rain filled the silence. I've been thinking, he said, about what it means to have you here. I waited. I structured my life to limit exposure, he said. People who care about me are at risk. I learned that at 19. I learned it again at 32. He looked at his hands. I learned it tonight. You're trying to tell me you're dangerous to be near, I said. I'm trying to be honest with you. Then be honest, not diplomatic. He looked up. I don't want to lose you, he said. 3 words doing the work of a longer sentence. I felt them in my sternum. You haven't lost me, I said. I could. His voice dropped lower. Ferenczi knows you exist now. They all do. You aren't. He stopped. You were supposed to just be someone who managed the accounts. I was sleeping on your sidewalk, I said. Nothing about this was supposed to be anything. Something moved through his face. No, he said. I suppose not. I set the book down, moved out of the chair, and sat next to him on the edge of the bed. Close enough that our shoulders were touching, and I felt him go very still in the way he went, still when he was managing a response. Tell me what you want, I said, not what you've decided, what you want. A long silence. I want. He stopped. His jaw tightened. The effort of it was visible, real. A man who'd spent 20 years deciding things, being asked to want instead. I want you not to be afraid of me. I'm not afraid of you, I said. You should be, maybe. I turned my head. His face was very close. A knot. He turned to face me, and we were not 3 inches apart anymore. We were 1 inch apart. And his eyes, stormwater gray and green, were doing everything his voice wasn't. Sira, he said. My name in his voice was always a decision. This time, it was a surrender. He kissed me the way careful people kiss, slowly, with complete attention, as if testing each point of contact before committing to the next. His uninjured hand came to my jaw, tilted my face up, and I felt his breath against my lips before the kiss itself, that suspended moment of yes, this, finally, and then his mouth on mine was warm and deliberate and deeply, quietly devastating. I kissed him back. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't desperate. It was the accumulation of weeks of charged silence and careful distance and all the things we'd said sideways, released in a single sustained moment of contact that made everything in my chest rise and settle at once. His hand moved to the back of my neck, steady, grounding. My hand found his shoulder. When we stopped, we stayed close. I've been thinking about doing that, he said quietly, since the kitchen. The first night. The night you found me, I said. The night you argued with me in the lobby about what an answer is. I laughed, a real one, surprised out of me. He looked at me when I laughed like I'd done something extraordinary. Don't look at me like that, I said. I'll look at you however I like, he said, but there was warmth underneath it. Private warmth. And I understood that this version of him was not one that many people saw. He brought his forehead down to rest against mine. We breathed together. The situation with Ferenczi isn't resolved, he said after a while. I know. It's going to get worse before it can be resolved. I know that too. You're certain about staying. I pulled back far enough to see his face. I found your building on the worst night of my life, I said. And every day since then has been complicated and dangerous and alive, in a way that nothing before it was. I'm not leaving something that makes me feel like I'm actually inside my own life. He looked at me for a long time. "I'll protect you," he said, not a romantic gesture. "A commitment, whatever it costs." "I know," I said. He reached into his shirt pocket, set the cracked watch on the nightstand beside us. "I called a watchmaker," he said. "He says the mechanism can be repaired." I looked at it, the stopped hands. "You're getting it fixed?" I said. "Some things," he said, "aren't meant to stay broken." He kissed my temple, slow, careful, and stayed. Chapter 10. The truth that left him stunned. The truth surfaced in November, on a day that started quietly. I found it in the records myself. The kind of discovery that arrives not with drama, but with the slow, terrible clarity of a pattern finally completing itself. I was cross-referencing the supplier network against the breach that Ryan's information had enabled, working backward through 6 months of access logs, and I found the thread, a recurring transaction, small amounts, the kind that don't trigger flags, monthly for 22 months. From a holding company, 2 layers removed from the Voss family accounts. The destination account was registered in Portugal. The account holder was a woman named Elise Voss. I sat very still. I thought of Dorian saying I became someone else in a kitchen at 2 in the morning. I thought of the watch with the broken hands. I thought of the transaction record for Renata Moore in Lisbon, the little girl, the 200,000. Elise Voss, the same surname. Not coincidence this time. I pulled the complete record, went back further, 3 years 5. The payments had started before his father's death, initiated from an account that bore Dorian's name but had an authorization code he hadn't given me access to, one of the locked rooms I'd never entered. I called Heloise. She was quiet on the phone for a long moment. "Where did you find it?" she asked. "The cross-reference," I said. "The Briar-Feld trace." Another silence. "Come upstairs," she said. 4th floor. She was waiting at the top of the stairs. Elise Voss was his sister, Heloise said. Before I could ask, just was. She died 7 years ago. Car accident, the official version. Dorian has never believed the official version. I breathed. "And the payments?" I asked. "He's been paying for an investigation," Helia said. Quietly, off book. He doesn't want whoever had a hand in it to see him looking. "He thinks it wasn't an accident. He thinks it was Ferenczi," she said. "Or Ferenczi's predecessor," a message sent to his father during a negotiation that broke down. She paused. "He has never told anyone this." I stood in the 4th floor hallway with this information, which rearranged everything. The obsession with Ferenczi, the relentlessness of his protection instincts, the way he'd said people who care about me are at risk with a weight I'd felt but not understood. The surveillance, the locked rooms, a man who'd spent 7 years quietly building a case for his dead sister while running a criminal empire, while keeping his hands steady and his face controlled and never, not once, letting anyone see the grief underneath. I went to find him. He was in the study. He looked up when I entered, the ghost of a smile that faded when he read my face. "Elise," I said. The blood went out of his face. I had never seen him look like that, not when the men came through the courtyard, not when the lights failed, not in any of the moments of crisis I'd witnessed. This was different. This was the interior thing, the unfortified thing, the thing he built 20 floors of control to protect. His jaw was rigid. His eyes, for a moment, just a moment, were a 19-year-old boy's eyes. How? The cross-reference trace. "Helis," I moved toward him. She told me. He stood from the desk, turned to the window. I watched his shoulders rise and fall with one controlled breath. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said. "I know." I came to stand beside him. "Is it close? The investigation?" A long silence. "Closer," he said. "Ferenczi's financial records. 3 of the accounts I'd been tracing back to transactions from 7 years ago, the same month she died." He paused. "I can't prove it yet, but you will." "Yes." I stood beside him and looked at the city and thought about patterns, and about a man who had spent 7 years looking for the gap that explained his sister. and about how grief can look like control when you're very good at deciding things. Dorian, I said. He turned. I want to help, I said. He looked at me for a long time. It's dangerous, he said, more than what you've already been inside. I know. If Ferenczi understands what I have, then we move faster than he expects, I said. You told me I'm good at gaps. Let me help you close this one. Something broke open in his face then. Fully this time, not just the corner of it. The grief was visible, and the exhaustion and the 7 years of carrying this alone, and underneath it, something I hadn't seen before. Relief, the specific relief of a person who has been holding something alone for so long that they'd forgotten it was possible to share the weight. Sira Voss, he said. And the surname, our shared and accidental surname, landed differently now, almost like it was trying to tell us something. Same last name, I said. Coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence, he said. I took his hand, the wrapped one, gently. Then believe in this instead, I said. You found me on a sidewalk and I found your sister's records in a filing cabinet and neither of us planned any of it. I looked up at him. But here we are. He looked at me, his hand tightened around mine. He leaned down and pressed his lips to my forehead. Slow, warm, the kind of kiss that isn't about desire but about arrival. The kind that means, I see you. I'm here, this is real. Here we are, he said quietly. Outside, the city moved. The cars were still there, but I knew their positions now. Ferenczi's name was written in records. I understood how to read. Somewhere in Lisbon, a woman and her daughter were safe. Somewhere, a watchmaker was repairing a clock with frozen hands. And on the 4th floor of a building full of locked rooms, 2 people with the same last name stood at a window holding the same weight. Finally, carefully, together. It wasn't a clean ending. It wasn't safe. The trial against Ferenczi would take 4 more months to build, and another 2 to deliver. There would be more cars and more names and more nights where the silence held too much pressure in it. But I had stopped sleeping on sidewalks, and Dorian Voss, ruthless, careful, impossibly controlled, quietly grieving Dorian Voss, had stopped carrying his sister's death alone. Sometimes the truth that stuns you isn't violent. Sometimes it's just this, that 2 broken things can carefully hold each other up. The hands on the watch would move again soon. We were counting on it.